Okay, so I think we get started. Welcome to Tableau Conference 2017. My name is Johnny Yan. I'm a software engineer on the connectivity team.
Hello, everybody. I'm Deepthi, and I, with Johnny and my team, work to make sure that Tableau customers get seamless connectivity experience while doing the data visualization.
So first and foremost, I would like to thank you coming to our session at high noon. And we still get such big crowd here. It's a great honor for us to have all of you here. And today we're going to talk about connecting to data sources for Tableau Server on Linux. It was a long journey to make our Server on Linux product almost out of the door. The connectivity team deeply involved in the process. Personally, I started from a racked Windows machine with no IT support, and I had to wipe out the hard drive and install the operating system myself. The first time when I rebooted the machine, after the installation finished, I got a black screen. And fortunately, I could still SSH into that machine. Weird, but that helped me to figure out what the problem is. And it turned out it's a display card issue, driver issue, display card driver issue. So install the driver, problem solves. That was really like a dark age, but that's long gone. With all sorts of such type of problems, we now have Tableau Server on Linux available on real-like distros and Ubuntu. Amazing, isn't it? And sorry. I'm fine, I think. So the journey is unfinished. There's a long journey in front of us. We are here to share with you what we have suffered during our journey and hopefully to expedite yours. It's Tableau's tradition to delight our customers as much as we can, and we will follow that tradition today. Besides the survey you will see at the end of the talk, the connectivity team would like to delight you in our way, a connectivity team specific survey. You can follow that link on the screen. To fill out the survey, it's on SurveyMonkey with easy to remember name, TC17_connectivity. We would like to know who you are and what Linux distros are you using, and possibly you're planning to run Tableau Server on. And we also would like to know what data sources and the auth mode you're interested in. And virtually, anything you would like to ask the connectivity team. Those are extremely important information for us. So please help us to serve you even better. So there will be two sections in this talk. First, I will talk about data source, connecting to data sources for Tableau Server on Linux. And Deepthi will talk about how to connect to them seamlessly in her second section. So data sources on Linux. You must be curious what data sources on Linux has Tableau supported. Here is a viz. I'm just kidding. So as you can see, we currently supported about 40 data sources on Linux. This is probably too broad to read. It is not intended to show you the details. I just try to give you a rough idea where we are. And these are the data sources on Windows, which Tableau currently supported. And if you put them side by side, you can see that the list on Linux is not much shorter than Windows, and we are on the way. And here is the full list of the data sources we have currently supported on Linux. Again, there are about 40 data sources we have supported. We have, and more are on the way. We have supported all the file-based data sources, except Microsoft Access. We have supported all the cloud-based ones, including Google BigQuery, applications like Salesforce, Service One. We have supported one Cube, Oracle Essbase, and we supported one JDBC, Amazon Athena. And more importantly, we have supported a lot of relational databases through ODBC drivers, like Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres. And we will be focusing on such type of connectors in today's talk. If you don't see a data sources you would like to use on Tableau server, you could go to our community webpage, community.tableau.com, and make a request, submit a request for new idea. So for you, the new idea is a request for new data source. We are watching that, but don't forget to vote for it. The more people vote for the idea, the more focus it will be on. So before we move on, I would like to share some background about how Tableau server connecting to data sources. Tableau server, actually desktop as well, is connecting to data sources through Tableau protocol server. Internally, we call it a Tableau serve. It's a standalone process. If something went south when you connect to a data source or make query to the data source, it might crash in the third-party code. So if that happened, Tableau serve protect us from crash from the third-party code, untrusted third-party code. And we just crash Tableau serve, but not Tableau server or desktop itself. And we use Unix ODBC as our driver manager on Linux. It talks to various drivers, which in turn talks to various data sources. And we will be talking more about that in a moment. So from our perspective, how do we support or add a data source? So usually the threads start from your request. What data source you want to support on which distro. And then we go out to check if the driver, some ODBC driver is available on the distro for that data source. And usually we will go ask the data source vendor or some driver vendor if they have the driver. Some cases, if it's free, if it's open source, we might just build the driver. And then we try install and configure the driver following the vendor's instruction for any and test it through iSQL. If all that went good, and then we integrate that with the Tableau. Probably most of the time we need to tune in a lot of capabilities. Most of the time the problem happened at this step. For instance, Microsoft SQL Server, the genuine Microsoft SQL Server Linux driver requires a specific older version of Unix ODBC to be installed on your system. Otherwise, the installation script will only install any version you installed on the system and then install their desired version. That's obviously not going to work with Tableau because we have to support connect to other data sources with the respective version we support, right? So we picked FreeTDS as our SQL Server driver on Linux. But it turned out FreeTDS hasn't implemented all the ODBC API as one I labeled out in the red box. And that caused a lot of trouble when we implemented So if you want us to add a new data source, please share with us your experience, your knowledge, or whatever to help us speed up the process. Yeah, this is one thing I want to mention. So this is true for about a year ago, but now Microsoft SQL Server Microsoft SQL Server comes to Linux, so we have to go back to check with them if they have a better driver on Linux, for sure. So now from your perspective, we already added a data source, supported data source. How do you enable a data source on Tableau Server? So obviously you need to install Tableau Server. I'm not going to go through the installation and the initialization process again. It will be covered by Deepti, and if you already have gone to Robert's delicious talk, you probably have some rough idea the whole process, how the whole process went. And here I would like to bring to your attention two important directories. One is installation directory. It is fixed, not configurable, at opt Tableau /Tableau_server. Besides all the other good stuffs, it contains all the binaries and the libraries, includes the binaries for Unix ODBC, which I will mention in a second. The other one is the data directory. It is configurable, and you can configure during the initialization time of TSM. But the default is /var/opt/Tableau server. And that, besides other good stuffs, includes all the configures and the logs. And that configuration includes the configuration particularly for the connectivity team, for the data sources. So you have initialized your Tableau server, but you're not done yet. Most of the time, if you try to open a workbook on the server, you probably will see this arrow, which is direct, which is clear, and you just have to install the driver. However, except the link, the arrow message, this is still in beta stage, so you will go to the data page instead to download the driver. I guess you probably need to talk with Erwin Dolobowski. He is the PM for the Server on Linux project to get the key to access that page. It is protected by username and password. So more background before we move on. Like I said, Tableau actually builds and ships Unix ODBC as we do for other third-party libraries like Qt and ICU, etc. It is installed along with Tableau Server, meaning if you install Tableau Server, it is installed directly. Actually, it sits side by side to other Tableau Server library and the binaries. The current version of Unix ODBC we're using is the latest release version of Unix ODBC 2.3.4, I think. And we only patched one single change because of a bug. And notice that we also ship Unix ODBC tools like iSQL and ODBC inst. The directory contains those tools already appended to the parse environment variable, like the TSM. So you could use, if you don't have Unix ODBC installed on your system, you will be able to use our version directly. Otherwise, you need to specify the parse. But we recommend you to use our version to cooperate with Tableau. Other than that, we also build and package a handful of drivers. That includes FreeTDS for SQL Server, Postgres, Oracle, and Essbase. All begins with Tableau dash. For Teradata, we also package it and for distribution purpose, but we don't build it. We just package it, and this is that is only RPM only, I think. Tableau drivers will Tableau drivers, I mean the ones we build, except Teradata, are all installed in opt Tableau/Tableau_driver, sitting side by side to Tableau_server. And most of the other drivers from the vendors are usually installed in the opt directory. Very likely it's in the vendor subdirectory like Simba, Amazon, or Teradata. And Tableau will check the configuration in the normal place /etc/odbc-inst.in. You could optionally, you could use those environment variables to override that place, but it's kind of complicated because it's not really overrides. So I should stop here. And if you feel you really need to use those environment variables, go talk with us. But we recommend that you just stick with the default parse. OK. So now you install and initialize Tableau server. You install and configure these drivers. Sometimes. Usually everything should work by now, but sometimes you will still have trouble connecting to your data source. So now what? You may ask, how can we end up with that? There could be numerous reasons. For instance, we had a driver which will remove the install directory in the post-uninstall script. However, yum is not cooperating with that. Actually, when you do yum upgrade or update, yum will install the newer version of the package and then remove the older version of the package. At least that's the order of the post-install uninstall script will be wrong. So when you upgrade that driver, yum will run the post-uninstall script last. So that will essentially remove all the files you just installed. More worse, if you ask yum, it will tell you the package is installed. So you will have countless such kind of weird cases. So I compiled a checklist to help you figure out troubleshooting the problem, what was wrong. So the first thing you will check is whether the Java package is installed. Even if yum could lie sometimes, but you will figure out in a second. And then you need to check the configuration. There should be an entry for the driver in the configuration for the data source that is required for the data source you try to connect it to. For instance, for SQL Server, you should have a free TDS entry in the configuration. And ODBC inst, in this case, is your friend. Remember the bug I just mentioned? Even if you install the driver and you configured it correctly, at least you think, but the driver parts could be invalid. So you still need to validate the driver part. And this is kind of a one-liner check if the file is there and did a little bit more than that, like checking the dependencies. So if all that is positive, that means you have confirmed you have installed the driver correctly and configured it correctly. And then you need to connect it with iSQL tool to see if it works. If it doesn't, it's probably some problem on your side. But if it does, so it definitely sounds like a Tableau bug. Then you need to send us some logs. As I said, Tableau server in desktop connecting to data sources through Tableau process will leave a lot of useful logging for our team. So you could go to the data directory, and there will be a logs directory under there. And in fact, there are many services could generate Tableau logs. For the connectivity team, we're particularly interested in the Tableau logs generated by SQL Server. But the more the better. Sometimes just some weird thing could happen, and actually I'm just helping a customer to solve some weird problem about connectivity. So last but not least, there are always data sources that Tableau does not support. So in such cases, you have at least two solutions. You could use our external extract API to create a Tableau extract and possibly continuously, incrementally append new data to the extract to be used on the server. And the other way is using our Connect ODBC connector, also known as other databases parentheses ODBC, as long as you have a ODBC driver for that data source. So it works as you could choose to use a driver, and in that case, you choose one driver available on your system, and then you fill out the connection attributes and then connect. The other way is using DSN. So you set up a DSN on your system, and you choose that one, and Tableau will parse the attributes in the DSN and data source names and fill it in automatically, and you can connect. So obviously, the DSN way gives you some flexibility to have a DSN with exactly the same name on different platforms, but with slightly different connection attributes to make the cross-platform portability work. Like if I create a workbook using Tableau desktop on Mac, and then I'm using generic ODBC, and I publish that to Tableau server on Linux. And if you want to, the workbook works on the server, obviously you need to create a DSN on the server with the same name, but you could manage to use different drivers or with different attributes, something like that. So that closes my section, and I will hand it over to Deepti.
Thank you, Johnny, for giving us an overview of what drivers we support and how we go about supporting it. Now to a topic that is nearest and dearest to... OK, something happened here. We lost the page.
That's what I did.
Can't we just close it? So now to a topic that is dearest to the heart of any server admin in this room, or for that matter, anybody who cares about security at all. Authentication. What is authentication? If I say in a simple layman language, authentication is validating a user is who he says he is. If you see this cute drawing we have on our slide, our friend Johnny, he went to Tableau server and he said, "Hi, I'm Johnny." Now Tableau server is thinking, do I know this guy? So it goes back and it checks, do I know any Johnnies? Yeah, I know a Johnny. Now, is this the same Johnny that he is saying he is? Tableau server goes back again, and it goes and validates using one of the million authentication mechanisms that this Johnny is exactly the Johnny he is saying he is. Why will you authenticate? Why do we care about knowing a person who he is? We authenticate to make sure that the right person has the access to right resources. In server world, server basically is a shared place for keeping our resources. We keep data there so that we can share it with our peers. Multiple users are there on the same server who are keeping their resources at the same location. Now, you'll want to make sure that your data is only accessible to people you care about, not other users who are also on that server. That is why we authenticate. Something is wrong with this thing. You don't see it here. Yeah. You keep toggling back? OK. OK. In this section, we'll be talking a lot about single sign-on and delegation and Kerberos and a bunch of things. So before I delve into the details of how you can configure things and where you can configure things, let's do a quick brush up on these terminologies. What is single sign-on? Single sign-on is basically exactly what the word says. I should need to sign on only one time to complete my workflow. What does it mean in Tableau terms? That I should be able to sign in one time onto my Tableau client. I should be able to connect to my data source using integrated auth of the user that just has signed in. I should be able to build my viz. I should be able to publish it on Tableau Server. And I should be able to view it back on the browser without needing to re-authenticate at any step. Now, if you see this workflow, it's a pretty long workflow. How will you make it work? There are a lot of moving pieces here. There are a lot of different machinery working in the whole flow. How will you make it work? So theoretically, you'll need to find a way that you can take our original caller's identity and you can pass it on step by step to the next. So I'm sorry about this, but this is misbehaving a little. There are a lot of technologies we use for single sign-on. One of the industry standard and very popular mechanism is Kerberos. Kerberos is a ticket-based network authentication protocol. It is an external network authentication protocol which makes sure that the nodes that you have in your workflow can communicate with each other in a secure way. Before we go into how will you enable the RunAs and Kerberos SSO, let's take a quick brief on what all we support for authentication on server on Linux. We support local authentication on Linux. What that means is that Linux Tableau server will maintain an internal identity store where it keeps its list of username and password that it can validate against. Linux server also has support for Active Directory, and it supports a bunch of other authentication options, including SAML, Kerberos, SSL, OpenID, integrated auth, etc. What all do we support for single sign-on and delegation? So what is already in on beta bits that you will get is that we have full support for RunAs SSO. We have started enabling support for delegation on a bunch of data sources. What is already in there is Microsoft SQL Server and Postgres. What's coming very soon is Spark SQL, Oracle, Cloudera, Hortonworks, and Teradata. They are in various stages of testing and development at this point of time. And what is not there is the rest of the world that Johnny just showed you. Why it is not there? It could be various reasons. It might be that data source itself doesn't support Kerberos very well. It might be that data source doesn't support Kerberos on Linux. It might also be that currently it's a bit lower priority on our list based on the demands we are getting from you guys. What is a RunAs user? Before we configure RunAs user SSO, we should know what RunAs user is. If you guys have already used Tableau Server on Windows, you might be very aware of this term, but just to brush up one more time, RunAs user is the service account that Tableau Server is running on. This is the account that Tableau Server uses to access various resources. It could be the resources that it needs for its own server manager functionalities, or it could be that it's connecting to data sources on your behalf. It is a little different on Linux than on Windows. We have two RunAs users here. This is to increase the level of security. We have TSM agent user, which basically accesses resources for Tableau Server Manager kind of functionalities. And then you have Tableau Server user, which we use to access database resources for the user. Another thing to keep in mind when you install Tableau Server on Linux is that the RunAs user is not reconfigurable. You can configure it one time at install time, but you'll not be able to do reconfiguration like you do on Windows. Let's get into RunAs workflow. How does RunAs work. It's pretty simple workflow if you look at this diagram. Tableau server has a RunAs user for which it has gone and generated a key tab. It takes this key tab, goes to the KDC to validate itself. KDC will generate a ticket granting ticket and give it back to Tableau server. Tableau server will take this ticket granting ticket and keep it in Tableau server cache. When the need arises to connect to your data source, it will take the TGT from the cache, give it to the driver, request a connection, and if everything goes fine, driver will take the TGT, revalidate it against KDC. KDC will say, OK, this ticket is valid, and you can go ahead and establish your connection. And then a flow of connection is established between Tableau server and driver and database server. This is a very high-level overview of how the Kerberos workflow works. If you want more details, we have other talks that we did. One we did yesterday, and John was presenting it. You can go and go through it. It's already posted mostly on TC website, and you can look at the package workflow, how it works in detail. Now, how does delegation work? First of all, what is delegation? Delegation helps SSO. How does it help? Delegation is a feature that allows an application to reuse the end user credential to access resources on its behalf on a different server. It is very important in Tableau server terms, right? Because you are a client on a machine. You have published workbook on Tableau server, and your data source could be on a third server. You want to log in once, and you want to access your viz on Tableau server, but you don't want to re-authenticate again for the data source. So that is where delegation comes into picture. So delegation will make sure it will take your credentials, and the RunAs user for which the delegation has been enabled is going to take your credential on your behalf and establish a connection to the data source on your behalf so that you can see the viz without needing to re-authenticate. How does this work? So this is more or less the similar workflow as RunAs workflow. It just adds one level of complexity here. So it's the same story. Tableau server RunAs user has a key tab. It goes to KDC, gets its TGT back. It's saved in the cache. Now, client makes a request to access its viz. Now the entire delegation machinery kicks in. What happens? Tableau server takes, using S4U, goes back to KDC and requests for a service ticket on your behalf. It takes that service tickets and saves it in the Tableau cache. Whenever there is a need to establish a connection, it takes that service ticket to the driver, requests the driver for a connection to database server. Driver goes to the KDC with the service ticket. KDC says it's valid, and a connection is established between the Tableau server, driver, and your data source. OK, so how will you go on enabling single sign-on using Kerberos? Our team has worked very extensively both on Windows and Linux data sources, and we have enabled data sources on Kerberos for a lot of data sources. What we realized when we started, that considering the number of steps you have to do to get this piece working, it's pretty overwhelming when you start with it. But more we did it, we realized if you follow religiously step by step from one end to the other, it's pretty easy to tame the three-faced beast. There are 4 basic steps that you need to do for enabling single sign-on. First, make sure that your Linux machine is configured properly. Second, Tableau server is configured. Third, SSO is configured for the RunAs user. And fourth, that data source is configured for SSO. If you look at the images behind the write-ups, these are the images from the Windows version of it. When we go through the details of all the commands, it might seem a little big because on Windows we have MFC-based UI where you can go and do these configuration, but on Linux it's all TSM command-based, so it might seem a little long, but essentially it maps to these images. What do you need to do on Linux machine for configuring it for SSO? First, create and log on as the user, as a system user, because for installing your Tableau server, you'll need to be system user. Join your Linux machine to the AD. We do not support MIT Kerberos at this point of time. We only support AD Kerberos, and that requires your machine to be joined to AD domain. Get the Kerberos libraries and packages. You can get these freely anywhere over the internet. Internally, we have used SSSD and PBIS, which is, again, in turn based off of SSSD. But you can go and freely download any of the Kerberos Linux packages. Go and install them. So that is done. That's all you need to do in this step. Then go ahead and configure a Tableau server. First step, you'll need to install the Tableau server, initialize and configure your Tableau server files, register your Tableau server, and configure your Tableau server to work with AD Auth. Then go configure SSO for the server run as. You need to generate 2 key tabs. One key tab you'll need to generate for the Tableau server, and one key tab you'll need to generate for the run as user. And the fourth step, you go and configure your data source SSO. That means generate a key tab for your data source. This is a breakout of what we talked about in that image. There are a lot of commands and a lot of write-ups and a lot of texts here. I'll go through it quickly, but it's more or less, it maps to the steps we just talked about. So Linux server machine configuration. First step, go and log in as system user and install your Tableau server. Get the necessary package and install them here. Join your Linux machine to the AD domain. Configure your machine. Your Linux server machine needs to be working with local DNS server. So configure your machine and make sure it is working with the local DNS server. When you install the SSSD or PBIS or any one of those Kerberos packages, you'll get a key tab file and a config file downloaded there. You go and rename them to Tableau key tab and Tableau config and change the permission on those. Then go and install and configure your Tableau server. For this step, I suggest go to beta pages that we have right now. We have left a few links on the slide, and then you can request access to beta pages, get the automated installer, and go register it. Set up the Tableau server with AD authentication. That just means log in as the username, password, license, and activate the license for your Tableau server and register it. And then there are a bunch of commands, TSM commands, that you can use to configure it for Tableau Server SSO, which basically is join it to the Active Directory, give it a AD username and password, configure a LDAP, make sure Kerberos is enabled by a flag, make sure it authenticates against the Active Directory. These are TSM commands that I've listed here, but all these you can do using a config file that is there with automated installer. Third step, configure RunAs SSO. This is pretty simple. Using the KT util, generate a key tab for your RunAs user and copy it to the common key tab location that Tableau server uses. Make sure you name it such that these key tab files are recognizable what they are for. Then configure your key tab using TSM commands to work with Tableau server. Fourth step and last step. This is the step you need to do for SSO delegation. Disclaimer here, you might not be able to do it all by yourself, and you may need to get in touch with your IT guys, because for this step, you need administrative privileges on your KDC. For Active Directory Kerberos, you can only enable delegation for an Active Directory account if the SPN has been set for that account. This is basically setting SPN step. With administrative privileges on the KDC, go set SPN for the RunAs user that you want to configure for. After that, generate the key tab for that user and copy it in the same key tab location. Make sure you've renamed this key tab file separate and so that you can recognize what it is for. And then, last step, go and configure your Tableau server using TSM command to work with this key tab file. That's it. We are done. Kerberos is working seamlessly on your machine. You can connect from your client to the data source, and you can publish, and you can view it back without re-authenticating. Currently, our testing and troubleshooting is pretty manual at this step. Johnny went through the list of how do you make sure that driver itself works. That is the first step you will validate if your SSO is not working. First step is the driver working. Once you're sure that driver and connection, everything works with explicit auth, go and validate Tableau Server SSO is working. The easy way to do it, sign in once, and make sure that you don't need to sign in again for your next steps. Third step, how do you validate delegation is working? Publish your data source to the Tableau server and access it back. If you can access it back without needing to sign in to data source again, then your delegation is working. How do you make sure that Kerberos kicked in while delegation? So go and validate the Kerberos cache on Tableau server and see an entry for that timestamp. That is about it. We have left a few reference pages here. There is a reference page to Tableau beta link. You can download the automated installer from here. There's a link for installing the drivers. You can get the drivers that work with your Linux server from here. And you can read a lot of things that Server on Linux guys have published for authentications that they support, for what is the identity store, and how do they support it. We soon have a documentation, official documentation coming out about what all we talked about, the steps and the commands that you need to do to configure RunAs and Kerberos. And then to reiterate again on what Johnny mentioned, please fill the survey and let us know which all distros you care about, which are drivers you care about, which are data sources you care about, and what authentication you care about on your data sources. All right, give it back to Johnny.